Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're adumbrating the first half of Chapter 8, America Secedes from Empire, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook.
Today, we have a guest. Madam, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Catherine the Great, but my friends like to call me Kathy.
That'll do. Kathy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So, after the bloodshed at Lexington and Concord, where the first shots were fired in April of 1775, about 20,000 Minutemen swarmed around Boston where they outnumbered the British for victory. Then the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in May 10, 1775. But the most important thing about the Second Continental Congress is that you need to know that they had no intention of wanting independence. They merely wanted to continue fighting in the hope that the king and the parliament would take their grievances into consideration and change. So at this Congress, they wrote up a list of grievances to Parliament. They adopted measures to raise money for a navy and an army, which is actually contradictory to their want for non-independence. But this was just a measure. And the most important thing was they selected George Washington to command the army. And this was a huge step because Washington was a true-born leader. He was, quite literally, Bay. He radiated patience, courage, self-discipline, and a sense of justice. And he also the political move behind this was that he was an aristocrat. So the fellow aristocrats knew that they could count on him to check the power of the masses. So, Sean, what about victories in America did we first have?
All right, so in the first year of the war was very inconsistent in that the colonists maintained their loyalty to the British while they still shot at the Redcoats, so it was very inconsistent. In May 1775, a tiny American force led by Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold surprised and captured the British garrisons at Forts Ticonderoga and Crown Point. This was very important because the colonists were able to seize cannons and gunpowder that would come in handy later on. So a month later, in June 1775, the colonists seized Bunker Hill, also known as Breed's Hill. Now, after the battle, instead of flanking the colonists, the Redcoats launched a frontal attack, and the heavily entrenched colonial sharpshooters mowed the Redcoats down until their gunpowder supplies eventually ran out and they were forced to retreat. So after Bunker Hill, the colonists passed the Olive Branch Petition, which begged King George for peace under the crown and peace in the war. But after Bunker Hill, George III slammed the door for all hope of reconciliation and declared the colonists to be an open rebellion, which was basically after their treasonous affairs. The king also hired many German mercenaries that were called Hessians because they were lured by booty and not duty. They had large numbers desert, and they also remained in America later on to become respectful citizens. The Hessians were not loyal to the British crown. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the colonial conquest in Canada?
Yeah, so at the same time that the colonies are experiencing victory in Ticonderoga and Breed's Hill, they're also pushing north in an offensive against the British. And this is what we see as it manifests itself in the invasion of Canada. The colonists decided that invading Canada would add a 14th colony and deprive Britain of a valuable base for striking at the colonists' revolt. Also, the French Canadians would, according to their theory, support the Americans because they supposedly were bitter about Britain's taking over of their land. General Richard Montgomery did succeed in capturing Montreal, but at Quebec, he was joined by Benedict Arnold, and indeed, Montgomery was killed during the Battle of Quebec, and Benedict Arnold was shot through the leg. After that, the two armies retreated back into America in disarray. And in January of 1776, the British set fire to Norfolk, Virginia, just as part of retaliation for their offensive. In March, the British were finally forced to evacuate Boston. So at this point, we're seeing a bit of a mixed plate. There's been colonial victories, such as in Breed's Hill, Bunker's Hill, and at Ticonderoga, but the colonists also failed in their invasion of Canada, and several towns have been burned by the British in retaliation. Tell me, Kathy, was any one person driving the colonial effort for independence? Was any one person prompting them to take action against the British?
Thank you for that question, Frank. This leads me into my next point, which is about Thomas Paine and how he wrote the pamphlet Common Sense, and he truly embodied the message no pain, no gain, because he urged colonists to stop this war of inconsistency and stop pretending loyalty and just fight for their independence. Nowhere in the universe did a smaller body control a larger one, so Paine argued, saying it was unnatural for tiny Britain to control the entire colonial America, and thus the colonists needed to find a government that represented all of them fairly. This sold sold more than 120,000 copies in the first few months, which is amazing. He truly went platinum.
That's great.
So, Abe, tell me about the idea of republicanism and how Paine fostered this.
Okay, so Paine argued that with his idea of the republic, where representative senators, governors, and judges derive their power from the consent of the people. His ideas about rejecting monarchy and empire and embracing an independent republic fell on the receptive ears of the Americans, though it should be noted that these ideas had already taken root in the Americas. The New Englanders already practiced this type of government with their town meetings. But some of the American patriots, however, favored a republic ruled by a natural aristocracy. They were less radical than Paine, and these more conservative Republicans feared that the fervor for liberty would overwhelm the stability of the social order. So we had some very radical Paine advocating patriots, and some more conservative ones too. So now, Frank, could you tell me about Jefferson and what he thought of independence?
Yeah, so Jefferson would definitely be considered among the radicals, as Abe pointed out. Jefferson was summoned to write the Declaration of Independence during the Second Continental Congress. Now, at the Second Continental Congress, which occurred in June of 1776, the fiery Richard Henry Lee urged for complete independence, an idea that was finally adopted on July 2nd, 1776. To write such a statement, Congress appointed Thomas Jefferson, already renowned as a great writer, to concoct this Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. He did so eloquently, coming up with a list of grievances against King George III and persuasively explaining why the colonies had the right to revolt. His explanation of independence also upheld the natural rights of humankind, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So tell me, Kathy, who were the Patriots and who were the Loyalists?
So this was a war that was very divided, especially in the colonies. So there were the Patriots who supported the rebellion, and they were called the Whigs, and not because they didn't have hair. Then there was the Loyalists who supported the king and often went to battle against fellow Americans. These Loyalists were also known as Tories. And then there was the people in the middle, the moderates, who didn't care one way or another. And so the Tories and the Whigs often tried to convince them otherwise, as we saw in our in-class simulation. So during the war, the British proved that they could only control Tory areas because when the Redcoats packed up and left these areas, fiery rebels would regain control through their political upheaval and all of their convincing arguments. The typical loyalist was generally conservative, and the war often divided families, as we saw with Benjamin Franklin, who fought against his illegitimate son William, who was the last royal governor of New Jersey. Loyal royalists were numerous where the Anglican Church was strongest, such as in the South, and they were less numerous in New England, where Presbyterian and congregations flourished. Loyalists were more numerous in the aristocratic areas such as Charleston, South Carolina. Now let's talk about the typical patriot. Patriots were generally of the younger generation, like Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry. The Patriot militia constantly harassed small British detachments, and they typically didn't belong to the Anglican Church, which is the Church of England, but were Congregational, Presbyterian, Baptist, or Methodist. There was also those known as profiteers, who sold to the highest bidder, selling to the British and ignoring the starving and freezing American soldiers, such as what we saw with George Washington at Valley Forge. So, Abe, why don't you tell me about the Declaration of Independence and Loyalists?
All right. So after the Declaration of Independence, Loyalists and Patriots were sharply separated from each other, and the Patriots often confiscated Loyalist property in order to resell it as an easy way to raise money for the war. So overall, basically the Patriots started treating the Loyalists very badly, and they would tar and feather them. But nevertheless, some 50,000 Loyalists served the British in one way or another in the war, either fighting or spying or doing other various jobs. And it was a huge blunder of the British that they didn't make use of the Loyalists more during the Revolutionary War. Now, Frank, could you tell me What was Washington's contribution to this beginning seed of war?
Well, Washington was the man who led our forces to eventual victory. After the evacuation of Boston, the British focused on New York as a base for operations. An awe-inspiring fleet appeared on the coast in July of 1776, consisting of over 500 British warships and 35,000 British redcoats, the largest armed force seen in North America until years later during the Civil War. Washington could only muster as much as 18,000 ill-trained men to fight, and they were routed at the Battle of Long Island when Washington suffered a defeat. Washington then escaped to Manhattan Island, crossed the Hudson River to New Jersey, reaching Delaware River with taunting, fox-hunting calling Brits on his heels. He crossed the Delaware River at Trenton on the cold evening of December 26, 1776, and surprised and captured 1,000 Hessian troops in a surprise attack unseen before during the war. Days later, he would use the same tactics against the British at Princeton, scoring 2 consecutive back-to-back victories. Nevertheless, it was odd that the leading general of Britain, General William Howe, didn't crush Washington when he had him at Delaware. Instead, he remembered Bunker Hill and was cautious of advancing his troops forward. Thus, General Howe of the British let Washington slip through his fingers when he had him cornered.
Thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and we will catch you guys next time. Champagne Charlie.